Good afternoon. I'm Lori Sundberg. I'm the president of Kirkwood Community College. I would like to welcome you to the Iowa Ideas Conference. The Iowa Ideas Conference is in its fourth year, and it's an important opportunity to gather Iowans around a common experience. Really, now more than ever, we commit to providing opportunities for every Iowan to be part of this experience. 2020 is a year that none of us could have predicted. Yet in true Iowa Ideas fashion, we see this year as an opportunity to raise up the issues that will bring us a stronger tomorrow. Kirkwood is honored to support the Iowa Ideas Conference. It's a great example of partnering with others in our community to bring a terrific conference to our state and to Iowans. Enjoy the conference.
We're going to be talking about online learning, which is a big deal these days. Obviously, work was already underway on Iowa's edTech landscape before the coronavirus pandemic arrived, and then students everywhere, including across Iowa, were forced online at a super fast rate. So many Iowa schools were sort of left scrambling to try to develop online learning curriculum in the spring. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. And how that went, and then what we can do to sort of bring Iowa's edTech companies and classrooms closer together going forward. So I just want to start by introducing some of our panelists. We have a couple here from the Iowa Virtual Academy, including Stephen Hoff, who has been the head of school for the Iowa Virtual Academy and leads a statewide team of experts who are dedicated to helping students reach their potential in online learning. He has a background in online school environments and understands, obviously, the challenges that come with navigating the platform. We have Alec Whitters. He's the CEO and founder of Higher Learning Technologies. He's a third-year dental student at the University of Iowa, a Cedar Rapids native, and ended up creating his own company that deals with mobile learning applications. So he's great benefit for us here today too. And then Tom Banta, who is the Director of Strategic Growth for the Iowa City Area Development Group, which has been tasked with leading the Iowa edTech Collaborative. So I just was going to start by letting them each sort of talk a little bit about their expertise in this field, and then I'll just jump into a few questions after that, and we'll leave some space at the end, obviously, for your questions too. So do you want to start, Stephen?
I certainly can. Well, thanks for the warm welcome, Vanessa. Once again, Steve Hoff, head of schools of the Iowa Virtual Academy. I have been in this position of running the virtual school since 2012. And prior to that, I was in virtual learning up in Minnesota as well at a school titled the Minnesota Virtual Academy. My school is partnered with the Clayton Ridge Community School District. So our school is a public school in the state of Iowa. Really no different than a traditional brick and mortar school, other than the fact that we operate completely virtual. Virtual education was something that was new in the state of Iowa. When I opened it, the first and only at that time, completely 100% virtual school. The school is operated through open enrollment. So the students open enroll out of their resident district into our partnering district to attend our school, which is seen as an intended center of the Clayton Ridge Community School District. It's been a fun ride, a roller coaster ride. When we opened the school back in 2012, I've been able to see many political shifts with regards to virtual schooling and what is virtual schooling to nowadays. Well, this year, every school in the district, in the state, needed to take part in trying to figure out a way to operate, distance learning virtually. So it's been a fun time.
Great, thanks. And then Alec, do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself?
I would love to. I guess the quick version of my background, as you said, I was in dental school. I became frustrated with the way that the teaching was. It was sort of in the very traditional model, and I saw things like black and white images of anatomy and thought, okay, the smartphones that we have could do so much more, and this technology that's being best practiced really in all these other industries needed to be applied to the way we're training our future dentists, but then also our nurses and doctors. So I ended up, to my parents' horror, leaving dental school in my 7th out of 8 years in 2012 to start HLT, really with the aim of modernizing the way we're training healthcare professionals in this country. And we started off with test prep so we could be able to get people coming in, the entrance and exit exams. Now we have something like 80% of graduating nursing students, 90% of graduating dentists in the United States using our platform. I think we've had like 25 million downloads since 2012. And so we're playing a little bit outside the sort of school structure, but really trying to build those lifelong learning habits and create that mentality of constant learning and using the technologies and tools that are available today and providing those to the people who are taking care of our families, these healthcare professionals, and helping modernize our world. So I could go on and on, but I'll save the time for things more at hand.
Great. And yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Vanessa. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. As you mentioned, I'm with Iowa City Area Development Group. We are the local economic development entity here in Johnson County. And almost a year ago to the day, the governor was in Coralville at the Marriott announcing the results of a techonomy report that the state had funded and pulled together a group of leaders throughout the state to explore the viability of an edTech cluster in the state of Iowa. And the announcement culminated with the creation of the Iowa edTech Collaborative, which is being incubated inside of ICAD in collaboration with Nuboco, and includes an accelerator. And we graduated a cohort of edTech companies this spring. But we see tremendous opportunity to build on the history and legacy of educational assessment and educational technology in the state of Iowa. Companies like HLT and Peridec are some of those rising stars today. And so we just, we're pretty bullish about the opportunity and look forward to it as an industry of the future for Iowa, similar to the session you guys had earlier around emerging industries. We very much think EdTech can play a significant role in our state's prosperity going forward.
Great, yeah. Well, thank you. So I just want to start by asking you all if you have thoughts about where we were before the pandemic when it comes to EdTech and the convergence of technology and learning online and in the classroom.
Well,
Stephen, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I can start behind, but I don't think that's any fault to anybody. When you think of traditional schooling, virtual schooling does not come to the front of your mind, and it's no fault to any school district throughout the state of Iowa, or really throughout the country. But technologies in a traditional brick and mortar school, you think of things such as a smart board or one-to-one education, right? But when COVID hit and students weren't able to be in person, there were a lot of things that came into play that a district couldn't help, and they had no curricula created that would be suitable with an online platform. And like I said, that's no fault of their own. There are a lot of other uncontrollables too. When trying to do distance learning, students and parents, they choose to attend a virtual school, so they've done their research, right? They know what goes into it. But when a traditional brick and mortar school is forced into going into something more online and remote, rural areas just don't have the bandwidth or the technology to handle Zoom. A lot of families live out in the country. Being up here in Northeast Iowa, living 9 miles down a gravel road, you don't have the ability to hook up to fiber optic internet, quick internet, no internet source. And then there's other factors that are uncontrollables too, such as school shuts down and parents may still have to work. So who's going to be at home watching their kids while they're doing online schooling? There's just a ton of different factors. But I mean, to go back to the underlying question, easily behind.
I mean, go ahead, Alec.
You know, and I have a different purview a little bit looking at the, you know, after K to 12, really around healthcare professionals. What I saw a lot of, from my point of view, was incremental thinking. How do we do this exact thing we used to do in the classroom and just make it digital? Sort of the digital books, as opposed to making an interactive case study, sort of digitizing a lot of the activities, and from my point of view, incremental. And I think there's not quite as much pressure on education as there had been in other industries. Like you look at things like games or you know, streaming movies, those sorts of things. There's this incredible pressure cooker that's forced all this new adaptation and evolution of the technology and how it's applied. I think in education pre-COVID, it was a place much more of, okay, let's just digitize this little thing and keep largely doing things the same way. So I think that actually there can be a lot of advantage, because now it's forcing education to come around and really think, okay, how can we do this best? Maybe it's not just the classroom exactly as it was, but through a Zoom meeting, maybe there's some changes to it, more breakout group, you know, those sorts of things. So that would be my take on what I've seen.
Yeah, that's interesting. You kind of say that everybody else was being forced to do this, and education wasn't as much until it really was. And Stephen, you kind of mentioned some of the shortcomings that this pandemic revealed in how education and technology were converging. But I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit more about that, about some of the holes that it really exposed in terms of where Iowa needed to catch up when it comes to virtual learning or just technology and education converging.
Well, I would say in the K-12 sector, there are a lot of things that school districts can't really prepare for or handle or do or have a say in with regards to, you know, legislation, et cetera. I mean, for instance, you know, your traditional brick and mortar school, the school closes down and you're tasked to maybe do some digital learning. The problem with that is being able to provide everyone a free and appropriate education. And if students don't have access to internet when they live 9 miles down a gravel road, you know, you can be held accountable as a district or as a school not being able to provide that student a free and appropriate education. So there are a lot of uncontrollables that go into trying to get a school district to go distance learning and remote learning at the snap of a fingers. It's impossible. I mean, that's why pretty much 99.9% of the state shut down last year. So students lost out on a third of their education because of that. This year, you know, then districts were tasked with, you know, a return to learn, you know, program. Still, you know, the uncontrollables are there. It can be done well, you know, with secondary students and higher education. But going back to a kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grader, if parents have to work, who's going to be at home educating that kid when that kid is trying to work? A kindergartner can't log on to a computer and listen to a teacher and educate themselves. So there's so many uncontrollables with regards to distance learning that we have to figure out if we're going to move forward. And that's where, you know, me running a virtual school, we have an advantage. You know, our curricula is created for online curricula. Our teachers are trained to teach remotely, right? I've been doing this since 2010. And the families that choose to come to us have done their research and realized that I, as a caregiver, as a parent, may have to take an extra leap of faith and go into their education a little bit deeper. You know, be a learning coach with that kid, be at home with that student that is 6 years old trying to learn online. So they've chose the route, whereas families and school districts in the traditional world didn't choose this route, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
To echo some of what Steve has said, I think as we look at the landscape, even in the backyard of an Iowa city, an urban community, we saw a number of challenges with broadband access. So I think there are continued infrastructure issues that play exactly into what Steve had said that are exacerbated with the inequalities. And so the equity opportunities are, it creates significant gaps there. And so I think that's those are two of the things that have been, I think, greatly exposed during this time. I think there are a lot of very well-intentioned people out there doing a lot of really, passionate, hard work, but some of these things you just can't make up for overnight. And as we continue to things continue to evolve and things continue to change. And I think there's always the notion that, hey, we're going to be right back to this and we're going to be right back to this. And so with the moving targets to some degrees, I think districts are trying to create multiple different plans and multiple iterations and then adapt in real time. And all of those create very challenging environments for forcing someone to somewhat change their entire paradigm overnight. So we put educators, we put parents, and we put students in a very difficult situation. And by we, I say COVID, ultimately at the end of the day. And it just was an opportunity to start to see where we may have thought we were doing pretty good in certain aspects, but we still have gaps there. So there's opportunity as a result. And I'm hopeful that we seize those and come out on the other side in better shape and learn from this, because I don't think it's going away. We will always need the horse is out of the barn, as they say. I don't know that we're going to be able to reel this thing back in, and there will be some very positive outcomes as a result that this disruption will ultimately bring us to.
Yeah.
Just to add one quick piece there, and it's in a different vein, but I think it is something that, in my opinion, really needs to be applied more in education, and that's creating the intrinsic desire and the growth mindset of learners, because it's inherently less controllable when everybody's in a different location and they need some internal sort of pull towards it. I believe a growth mindset can actually be trained, but sort of the activities have to hook people a little bit more, because, for example, everyone in this room could be, you can go browse other stuff on the internet if it's not something engaging during the middle of it. And so I think it creates more sort of personalization opportunities, and it's exposed that sort of the one size fits all, sit down and shut up and listen to the teacher, that you can get away with that more so in other environments. I think that there's this need for a little bit more of driving that intrinsic and that growth mindset within the learners. I know that's true of our audience more so in the higher ages, but I think that, at least in my head, to my intuition, there's probably even greater opportunity the earlier you start with that sort of mindset training and learning how to learn and fostering and fueling creativity. And I think that needs to be part of the system.
Alec, yeah. I'll piggyback off that. That is so true. In our teacher training program, the engagement and how to engage students in distance learning is probably the key, most important thing to do. Just because it's in a classroom, the teacher can see the students and see if they're, doing whatever. But in distance learning, you don't know if they're surfing on their websites. So to be able to have an engaging lecture, the idea, at our school, what we train our teachers is less teacher talking and more student talking. Get the students to interact with one another, interact with the teacher. Students learn better from their peers rather than sitting and listening to a teacher lecture for 45 minutes. So the engagement piece is spot on.
I'll talk about how that's applied for us and how we saw it, right? Because I'll try not to go too far down, but I feel very strongly about this. So we have tried a variety of different materials to put in front of our learners, right? Our learners are not sitting in a classroom with somebody over them when they're on our platform, so they can choose to come and go as they want. When we do long text passages, that is not something that people engage with nearly as much. What we have found is, they want something they can engage with, something they can move around, something they can pick an answer to, drag and drop, an interactive case study where they can go from one element to the next and sort of control how the story shapes itself, as opposed to, hey, we have this long lecture, listen. And we find that, so we've I really think that applies in some of the changes that are going to be forced to be made in the classroom that I think will actually be very positive for the long term.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask for people who are listening to this and are not really in the weeds when it comes to experiencing a virtual education right now. Can you guys talk about what it all involves? I mean, obviously it's not just all like a Zoom teacher replicating what they do. I mean, can you talk about all the tools that folks are being asked to use, and how that's translating, from what it was to this having to be entirely online?
Well, at our school, the Iowa Virtual Academy, it's a combination of everything. I mean, everything you do in a traditional brick and mortar school, we do at the virtual school. They have their curricula that they log into on the platform, and it's modular curriculum, much like if you think of, if you took some virtual school at the college level, et cetera. You log into your English 9 class and you do your daily assignments. On top of that, they have live instructional sessions with their peers and with the teacher. So it's really a combination of everything. We have assessments. Data. The biggest thing with us is we have so much data we can gain with these students because it's all at our fingertips right there. That we have them take an assessment. Bam, we have all the data from the students in grades 9. What areas are the deficient with regards to standards, and then it's data-driven instruction right there. So there's so many benefits to virtual learning, and our teachers have so much information on these students that they can give this really individualized instruction per student. So it's a combination of everything, the regular classwork, right? But on top of that, it's the live instructional sessions, the targeted sessions, remedial sessions, one-on-one sessions, etc. And it's in a platform much like this. And the best part, my favorite part, unfortunately, we can't do that this year right now because of COVID and travel, etc. But our school, the common question is, doing this for so long, the single most common question I get is, how do students interact? How do they personalize? How do they get to meet peers, etc. Everything you do in a traditional school, we do here too. Field trips, monthly field trips, virtual field trips, lunch bunches. I mean, we do yoga over lunch hour, right? I mean, you just got to be creative with regards to how you're delivering it. But students aren't just sitting there sheltered by themselves, not interacting with one another. It's a real cool thing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to really just share some perspective. I think what Steve is describing is obviously from the lens of someone who has built an environment designed for this, right? And trained instructors and created this space that is built for this. I think that one of the challenges, I share an anecdotal story from our son. He's a sophomore here in town, and he's a sharp kid. He's a 4.0 kind of guy. He's pretty self-motivated with regard to that, but we talk about it at the dinner table and we say, well, what's going on? How was school today? And some of the challenges, even for a guy who's pretty tech savvy, is a number of these teachers that this was not their kind of native state, that they had to make a shift over these last few months. What feels natural and right for them to maybe try and reimagine what their brick and mortar environment looked like through a Zoom channel or some other medium, you start to access multiple different platforms. And then you start to create other issues with, well, in one class, I log onto this site and I get my information this way. In another class, maybe I have 3 different layers of that. So there's not a lot of consistency. So there's a fair amount of inconsistency in how these students engage from class to class, course to course. And I think it's even creating challenges for some of the more savvy and proficient students. And I think these are things that over time will be ironed out, but it's a disruption, I think, for what our students are facing in this current environment.
Sure.
Fragmented was the word I was going to use. And so I think it plays right into that. But I think that's normal when an industry first emerges. I mean, even if you look at something like social media, right? I mean, there was a wide variety, and then it sort of all ends up converging into some core ones as the experimental and best practices and best things sort of emerge. So I think that's normal. And COVID's just sort of hitting the accelerator on us going through that process that might have taken 10 years. Maybe it'll be 5 years for some, real winners to be emerging, which I think also creates some great opportunities for a state like Iowa that has great education companies to really come together and get some services and platforms and best practices that we can help be a leader in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question everybody wants to know too from this is that, say they come up with a vaccine and kids, the fear factor sort of goes away and everybody gets back to class. What do you think will be lasting from this experience, and how do you think education will be reshaped by having to go through this?
Well, I'll speak from the lens of, both traditional and virtual. We have the motto that, there are some students here in our school this year that probably wasn't their first choice. They wish they were back in the traditional brick and mortar school, but because of some health issues with their parents, with their grandparents, with their brother, their sister, they're in our school. So, our motto is we're going to give them every opportunity not to want to return to a traditional brick and mortar school. But, we can't, we're a choice school. And I think the biggest thing that a traditional school will learn from in the Department of Education is they need to be prepared for this a little bit more than what they were in the past. The idea behind, distance learning at a traditional school isn't for long term, but if they can develop a program and a plan that they can implement at the snap of fingers short term so that students do not miss out on 3 months of school, then I think it's a win for everybody. Learn from it, develop a program, develop a plan that could be short-term, medium short-term, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but the students can still learn at home without having that interrupted education time. Consistency is huge, in secondary and primary education.
I think we have to leverage some of the things we learn, though, and we can't let it go back to the way that it was exactly. There is some things that can be better about the online tools, the online environment, and I think if we allow it to go back to exactly as it was before, then we really blew an opportunity to be able to carry this. I mean, because yes, there is, like, I look at, we 50, 60 people at our company. There's some real challenges with not being able to get people together. There's some real advantages too. And can we sort of have a little bit more of the best of both worlds and leverage the good sides of it? I worry a little bit that it'll just, oh, okay, thank God that's over. And I think that there needs to be some people really pushing for, to hold on to some of the good elements in that direction. I think it's going to go on for long enough, though, that that'll sort of be forced and people will get used to it to a larger degree, and they'll realize, like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense to continue doing this. Maybe we should have these breakout groups that we were having with it. Maybe, there is a day a week where it can be from home, so it can be more, focused, or learning time, flipped classroom concepts.
Sure. I'm wondering if any of you can talk about what was compelling people online, or to be, maybe this is a question for Steve, but to be in the virtual academy before the pandemic. What was the big driver then that maybe, as you say, wasn't as strong, obviously, as it became?
I would say parental involvement and personalized learning. I spoke of all the tools that we have at our fingertips with regards to student data, and being able to look at the data and adjust our instructional strategies, daily, weekly with students, so that we can fill those deficiencies, make them proficient. And then, a big thing in our primary ages is just parental involvement and students being able to progress at their level. We go into a traditional brick and mortar school and you walk into a lecture and somebody's on chapter 3, lesson 6, and that's what everybody in that classroom is learning on. Student A over here could probably be on chapter 10, lesson 4, because they're a little more advanced. Student B might take a little bit more time to fill in those deficiencies, so they're probably still at a cognitive level of chapter 1, lesson 3. In a virtual school, those students can progress at their own pace, learn at their own pace, and not feel pressured to be at the pace where everybody else should be or is.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that makes me wonder, a lot of people have talked about whether, some kids will be left behind or what's going to happen. But I mean, do you see how do you see kids coming out of this? Do you see them coming out of this ahead perhaps? Or do you think there will be kids that have faced challenges that others didn't and didn't have technology and will be left behind here?
We have 65% of our population this year is new. So, and 35% is returning. And we do assessments that are required by the state of Iowa, and in grades K through 6, early literacy, 40 to 50%, or no, 40 to 50 are probably, or 40% are probably at benchmark, meaning 60% of the students that are not at benchmark. So we're seeing a lot of, especially in the primary grades, kindergarten, first, second, they missed out on those reading blocks, right? They missed out on a third of the year of this, school year last year. So we are working hard to try to fill those gaps. If they don't have it, if they weren't taught it last year for a third of the year, they don't have it. So there are so many deficiencies this year because of the missed schooling time last year that is making it not difficult, but interesting and fun to try to fill in those blocks.
Do you think that we'll be able to do that virtually, or do you think that people will need to get back to some form of in-person option to make up for the lost ground, or do you think that everybody will be able to catch up in terms of the technology involvement?
Well, that's what we're here for. We're a virtual school. That's what we do best, right? I mean, that's our job and that's our role. Yeah, absolutely. We'll be able to catch students up. We'll be able to, pick up where they're left off and try to fill in those deficiencies. And I think as time goes along, if stuff like this drags on and traditional brick and mortar schools are forced to go online, they'll learn, they'll adapt, and they will come up with best practices to get those, tools and whatnot in check, so they can, to continue to deliver the education. If not, then they're going to be left behind, and and that's not a good thing. But it's possible to do it virtually. It's absolutely possible. That's why we're here.
I think in the big picture too, our society, and I actually would make the argument, and I'm an optimist, but that it's going to build some resiliency in this next generation, having to go through some of these challenges and solve some of this. It's sort of some of the entrepreneurial. How do you do this new thing? How do you build this? How do you go through a challenging situation? How do we move to a digital world? So at least for me personally, when I look at it over, a 10, 20 year time horizon, in terms of how it's going to impact these other generations, I believe, and I think there's at least an argument that there's ways this can really play out well in the long term. There's no doubt in the short term, there's deficiencies being created because there's challenges that sit in the system whenever you start moving towards something new. And so that's just part of doing something new, is you're not good at it at first.
Do you think that this is widening any sort of socioeconomic gaps in learning for students? I mean, kids that don't have the access to technology or to broadband or, to parental supports. I mean, is this making any of those things worse, and how can we make up for that if so?
I think in the near term that there's truth to that. I think the longer that it continues, that will potentially enhance or have a longer term negative impact. I do believe that at least in the near term, people have recognized that, and Steve's touched on some of the significant challenges, especially in that primary space, that K through second grade, third grade, and the amount of parental involvement that's required. And how that's to some degree taking them either out of the workforce or away from their own kind of day-to-day and some of the challenges that are created there. But if you've already been kind of put in a challenging socioeconomic position and you don't have those additional resources, it's going to be really challenging for you. And I think we're starting to see that early on with this 100% online that we've been living in. That said, you know, I know that at the community level, a number of folks, they've created these neighborhood nests. So these small pockets where they can add, you know, create the bandwidth, create the structure and the infrastructure to support these children that may be in some of these areas that don't have the broadband access or do not have the parental support in this space. But so, you know, and to Alec's point, there is growth and there is opportunity that lives in this if we take the time to really keep an open mind to it and explore what there is. But the longer this goes on, it's going to grind on certain socioeconomic groups much more, you know, it's going to be more challenging for some than others, certainly. And this exacerbates that. But I remain optimistic as Alec that we will learn and that we will rally in the near term to hopefully provide those resources in an effective and meaningful way, like people have started to do with those nests.
Sure.
I think, I mean, the dream of online learning is all students can have access to the best learning in a personalized way for them. So I think the dream is that it actually narrows the divide. I think in the short term, it probably is widening it. So I'm hopeful, though. You know, it's part of the dream of what I'm trying to do with my company is, you know, for the world to really have, you know, world-class best practice, lifelong learning practice that people, not just in Iowa, not just in the US, but we have people at every country in the world using it. And I think there's opportunity for, you know, something like nursing or dentistry for some of those best practices from the best teachers in the world to have a wider access to people who normally could never have. Plus, when we start playing at scale with something like we have, we can really diminish some of the upfront costs. And so I think there's, once again, huge opportunity, and I want to be out there fighting for it because I think learning is the best thing we can give to the next generation, the best way we can improve the world. But I think in the short term that dream is not realized and it's probably being increased.
Yeah. I guess I'm wondering, I'm seeing some comments in the chat. I mean, could you guys talk at all about the argument that real in-person teachers can't be replicated online? And what about those instructors that got into this years ago and aren't necessarily interested in being a virtual teacher, but want to be in the classroom with kids? Like, how do we balance that or respond to that?
Well, I would invite anybody in the state of Iowa to come to one of our graduation ceremonies and see if the thought still remains that personalized connections can't be built in a digital world. We have every opportunity that you do in person to build those connections. It's just finding it and doing it and going about it a different way, and that's through here. Having different sessions, not just learning sessions, but the different groups, the different clubs, etc. You know, that's one thing that we're very proud of at the virtual school, Iowa Virtual Academy, is those relationships, are those relationships that we do build with those students. And it's almost like a family-like culture. So it's doable. That goes back to the question, you know, the repetitive question that I often get on, you know, just that, you know, how do you build those relationships? How personalized, you know, students just don't communicate anymore face-to-face. They communicate in so many different tools, so many different ways, digital, and they build those relationships just as strong in a digital and an online world as you do personally, in person.
Yeah.
My personal stance is that I think I don't view remote as this sort of panacea cure for everything, and that it's going to completely replace, you know, hands-on learning. And like I've said, you know, the world I've played in more so, it's like, you know, dental, right? Okay, you have to be in there and practice doing the surgeries, or, you know, medical for doctors or for nurses. I mean, there's a certain hands-on element that I think makes a big difference. But here's the thing, before I go to do that dental surgery, I should be able to watch somebody do it and have an interactive, you know, flow through where I can make decisions and do some of that critical thinking and practice that skill. You know what? Maybe I can have easy access to a few extra lectures to be able to do that ability. So to me, it's a vital tool that needs to sit in the toolkit. And you know, I think it can sort of be put in this box of what learning is. I think there's all sorts of different exercises and activities that can be done to enhance learning that, frankly, computers and software can do better. I think there's a lot where it's much worse, and that we are social creatures. I think a lot of it can be done online. I think there's a need to have people together occasionally. I mean, Steve, you talked about, you know, you're having some of these different events. We're humans. We need that personal connection. So to me, it's a tool in the toolkit, but it's a tool we don't pull out enough, and we're not leveraging in the right ways from my point of view.
No, exactly. And I'll be the first to say online and complete virtual education isn't for everybody. I mean, it's not. It's for the people that it works for. Just like traditional education isn't for everybody. It's for the majority that it works for. But there is there's a time and a place and a purpose for, virtual education, and for those students and families that it works for, it's great.
Depends what generation you are too. I mean, so we have mobile learning on smartphones. You know how many people I heard from, and we started in 2012, 2013. I heard from so many people. People do not want to learn on a phone. This won't work, right? So we built this web version, did all this stuff to push people there. We put all this effort to push people there. I mean, the next generation is fighting. Like, they say they want PC when we ask them. When we actually give them the choice, like, we are seeing so much usage. We had, I don't know, 10,000 plus years spent on our iPhone products last year by students. And we find we're having to pull people to the other areas. They like to use this new technology, and, the other generations try to always say, like, you can't, no. The way, well, I like a paper book. I like a book in my hand. I always need that. It's like, well, that's great, but that's what you got used to and you had for your whole life. For other generations, I really think there's starting to be some different trends in how they consume and process information. Does not mean there's not value in person, though. I think that has to be a component as well.
And just to touch on that, I agree. I don't see the teacher being replaced or displaced by technology. I absolutely see technology enhancing that teacher's ability to do their job more effectively, and maybe take away some of the noise that gets in the way of their true expertise and their gifts in teaching and educating students. I think the social emotional learning components continue to be at the forefront, the holistic learning frameworks, and I think, continue to realize that social emotional, those grit scores and those skill sets are critically important. So if technology can help with some of the hard skill stuff to free up our educators to be able to go deeper and build those relationships through multiple mediums, be it phones or online or in virtual environments, but I do not see the in-person or the physical human role in this leaving anytime soon. I think it'll only be enhanced by this.
Yeah, well, speaking of teachers, I'm curious though, because many obviously this fall are being asked to do the hybrid version where they have some students who are online and some students who are in person, and maybe having to juggle students switching back and forth between that. And I'm wondering, do you feel like that is too much, or what do we need to do sort of systematically to support this being a sustainable model? Or do you think that how will it look different next semester, if we've learned from lessons this fall?
Well, I don't want to speak for teachers because I'm not one of them. I certainly expect that they have their hands full and they're doing the best they can with what they've got. And I'm certain that this has probably created some additional strain and stress for them in this time. But as with any kind of challenging and emerging space, there will be things that we learn. We'll get better at this, and by we, it'll be our collective education community. And they're gonna find things that do work. I think we'll have a better idea of what is and isn't effective. And unfortunately, anytime there's disruption or emergent technologies, there's going to be a learning curve that comes with that. And there's really no substitute for doing and learning by doing. In my own personal experience, as painful as it may be, it's just part of the process. And so I'm optimistic. We did a survey. We engaged a number of educators in April, May timeframe in a lead up to a solution provider webinar that we hosted in June for educators throughout the state. And we had well over 100 respondents from all over the state. And a couple of things that we asked were, how prepared are you for this virtual and online environment? And I'd say, on a scale of 10, about 6, it was a 6 out of 10 on average. So I think there was varying degrees, and a lot of our education professionals probably are more tenured. I think that it's just a more tenured space than a lot. And so this is a major kind of disruption for what they were accustomed to as you think about it. But outside of that, even though 6 out of 10 or 6 was that kind of aggregate score, we said, well, how important is personalized learning? Well, that was an 8.3. So that same group of people understand and recognize that. And then how important is the virtual solution? And that came back at 7.9. And then ultimately, how supportive of are your districts? And that was just shy of a 7. So I think generally speaking, our educators are aware and have been that there is value in this, that they're in a transitionary space. And then ultimately, this has been forced upon us. And human beings aren't very good with change, especially drastic change and dynamic change of something that's very complex like this. So I think they're doing the best they can given the circumstances, and we're going to learn and we're going to get better. I'm fully optimistic in that.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, I guess I'm curious if you guys have thoughts about what school districts or universities or even the state could be doing more, learning from this fall to support this being a sustainable model going forward. Are there specific, is it like funding? What sort of resources and supports can we provide or that are needed?
Yes, and yes. I'm trying to figure out a way to do it being a public educator or try to say, but yes. There's teacher shortages, and as Tom talked about, a lot of the teachers that are in Iowa, all across the country actually, are tenured, and training is huge, and I think that'll come. The issue was everybody was forced into it, and nobody was trained on it, and nobody was prepared, and nobody was ready. I got to believe that eventually, with training and with being more prepared for it, and et cetera, teachers will be able to adapt and get better. School districts will adapt, but yes, fun. With everything to get better, you need funds, and you need proper training. You need people to develop things for this, and education has been historically behind in times. I mean, traditional brick and mortar schools they're behind in times, and that's no fault of theirs.
I think to me, and I think about it, right, I come from a slightly different lens. I'm well aware of that I don't fully feel all the pain points, but I think that education, and particularly edtech community in Iowa, I think it's a mentality of a growth mindset. How do we use this for good? Yeah, there's a lot of terrible things and things happening in the short term, but it's education. It's sort of eating our own dog food, as they would say in software, using our own, right? We need to be learning as the people who are helping to educate others. How can we best do this? What can we use from this that's good? How can we get through this? And whenever a new thing is done, people are always bad at it. That's like the normal part of the learning process. So to me, the mentality that's taken in that growth mindset, I think sits at the top of the list, and that right tone being set. So that's one. I mean, I do think the funding piece is an important one, because education isn't this for-profit world that a lot of other industries are, or not to the same degree, particularly in the schools. And so making sure there is the right resources and incentives is always a challenge, but I think it's something really important to invest in, and in the long term is an investment that pays off hugely for our states and communities. My belief is, it's the investment that pays off the most is investments in educating people, and it's the reason I want to be working in this industry.
Yeah, we've got a really interesting question here in the chat that's asking about how we could equip rural schools elsewhere in the world, in rural communities, to make online learning possible, so that maybe kids that weren't getting a great education could by participating virtually. Is that something that we should be looking into, or that's possible? Or even, it even mentions like cultural exchanges, that sort of thing, like, you know, opening up the world for learners here too.
All right, I have to go on this one because I am in Florianopolis, Brazil right now doing this.
There
So
you go.
I am 8,000 miles away from all of you. And so there is opportunities to effectively leverage things like connecting people in different parts of the world to be able to, I mean, that's an advantage of remote. So I think we need a mindset of thinking like, where are some of the good things that can come from it? And so there can be, you know, at least for periods of time, more location agnostic. I think that can create opportunities then to be able to do things like, yeah, connect students. It's like the cultural exchange. You know, when you have a foreign exchange student, I think people learn a lot from that. I think learning about our world is vital, and I love that idea and question, whoever asked it, especially given my context of, yeah, you know, I'm on a remote working retreat down here to leverage some of the upside because our office is closed anyways.
Yeah. Tom, did you have something you wanted to add?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, well, no, that's fine. I guess I wanted to just ask too, if you could all provide, I mean, we're getting near the end of the hour here, so if you could give any advice to online learners, online educators, innovators, what do you think people need to know about this as they go forward learning virtually for now?
Well, I guess as with anything, as we kind of adapt and grow and progress, it is a messy, sticky thing ultimately, and there's a lot of pain points. But I do invite and welcome those that are optimistic about our future and specifically the role Iowa and Iowans can play in the education of the future to engage in our work with the collaborative. edtechiowa.com is our resource. Our goal is to bring together educators and others in this process to better understand what's out there. I think there's no shortage of technologies out there. I think what the real challenge is there may be a shortage of effective technologies. And so how do we start to, how do we start to bring those educators and those frontline folks together and bring those ideas and problems that they're facing to the front lines, and then bring our business minds and our innovators and others around those ideas to bring these to life and help innovate in this space. And so that, I think, is the intention of the Iowa EdTech Collaborative, and it's kind of an open invitation to any of those folks on this forum to engage in this and reach out to us, and let's start some dialogue around it and figure it out together.
You know, I'll hit on the theme I've been saying this whole time, which to me is, let's not let the world happen to us. Let's happen to the world, you know, and that's like a saying I say for myself, but it's sort of internal versus external locus of control. Yeah, something bad is happening here. There's no denying that. There's an easy lens to look at sort of for us going through, but I don't think it doesn't again. I don't think it's effective. We have to look at reality and figure out, how do we make the best of this? What are the good parts of it? How can we apply a growth mindset to it? We don't have to pretend like there's nothing bad, right? There is bad things that come with it, but we may as well try to leverage it as best we can and apply a growth mindset and learners mentality and be learners ourselves as the educational system as we go through this. So I guess I've been saying that all day, so I'll stick to that for the end.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And I'll kind of speak from the lens of entering a virtual school. And this is what I often tell new families, new parents, new students. There are four big things. Establish a routine. You know, online schools provide a flexible schedule, but having something defined is helpful. You know, set aside time to focus on assignments and build in those breaks. Don't just push through everything. They have breaks in traditional brick and mortar schools. Another thing that is huge is creating that dedicated workspace. Have a space that's dedicated for your schoolwork. That'll help you stay organized and focused. It doesn't have to be for everybody. Some people might learn better outside, right? But getting into that space will allow your student to know that it's time to pay attention for their classes. Be patient. It's a huge adjustment. There will be adjustment to get used to, but our teachers and staff are here to help you along the way, with the transition. And reaching out. You're at home in a virtual school. It may be easy to forget that there are just as many staff members in a virtual school as there are at a traditional brick and mortar school. Reach out to your teachers, reach out to your advisors, reach out to your counselors, reach out to your principal, etc., because we're here to help you. Those are probably the 4 biggest things that I tell our families every year when we go into a new school year.
Yeah, and before we go, I want to ask quickly, have you guys seen a huge surge in web apps and different educational tools popping up? Is that a concern that folks will have too many options now to choose from?
Oh, I think there already were too many options even before this started. I think that's the opportunity here, is to start to whittle them down and figure out what are those effective tools and effective options, and help our educators kind of find those as well. So I think there's no shortage of them out there. There's just a shortage of effective ones.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time. I just want to thank everybody for participating, for listening into the conversation. Super helpful to me as a parent navigating this too. So thank you all again for participating and for sharing your wisdom. We do appreciate it.